All right, welcome to another episode of the Meat Mafia podcast. We are joined today by Justin Maris. Justin is the founder of Kettle and Fire, and we are super excited to have him on today. Justin, what's going on?
What's up, guys? Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for joining us. We got to get you a Meat Mafia Italian name.
Do you hand those out at every show? I love that.
For certain guests, we think you make the cut.
Justin, we always joke that joining the Meat Mafia, we do like a bone broth christening. So we might need to partner up with you who can supply the bone broth.
Dude, happy to. Kettle and Fire baptism sounds dope.
Yeah, I like the branding behind it. Well, we're really excited to have you on because we actually came into contact last year. Good story behind that, but we've come into contact. Initially I was applying for a job to actually work for you. And you're sort of, whether you realize it or not, you're sort of the reason we're here. So we have to thank you first off, because I don't think I would be in Austin and I don't think we would be doing what we were doing if you were not writing and doing what you were doing. So appreciate everything you do.
Appreciate that, man. And so quickly, you guys have outstripped me in Twitter followers. So good job.
You got to write some threads, man. You put out that amazing newsletter. I'm sure if you wanted to, I'm sure you could turn it into some banger threads.
Sure. Yeah, I know. I'm struggling in that area right now for some reason, but it's something I need to work on.
Well, you've got a lot going on, so it's definitely, I'm sure it's probably not in your scope right now either. So I think one of the things we were interested in getting into was sort of your background in the primal ancestral health movement, and then how that led you to starting Kettle and Fire. I know that your own personal dietary habits played a huge role in you seeing that trend and diving headfirst into it. Like, I've listened to several podcasts where people were kind of critiquing your initial thesis around bone broth being a legitimate business. And then lo and behold, it's been this massive market opportunity. So I think getting your story, sort of your background and some of the personal health stuff, and then how that led to you starting your business would be amazing.
Yeah, for sure. So I kind of got into this ancestral health stuff when I was in college. I was 21 and I was like trying to start my first company. I was taking 18 credits at school. I'd like just taken an internship. I was like doing a Teach for America type thing called Jumpstart. And basically I like had a super full plate, and I was also trying to date, got a new girlfriend, also, was doing on the social scene. It was ridiculous. And so what I did is I read about, I think somewhere online, I read about, have you heard of like polyphasic sleeping? Basically like you sleep, like 4 hours a night, and then every 6 hours you take a 20-minute nap. So I was like, sweet, this solves all my problems. I'm going to do this. So I tried it for like 2 weeks, and it was terrible. Like I would make it 2 weeks and then I'd just sleep like 18 hours straight.
Yeah, it's not the least sustainable health hack there is.
Totally, man. Yeah, it's absurd. It's absurd. But like when I was reading about this, it was the first time, and this sounds silly now, but it was the first time at that age that I'd come across this idea of like, what you do can actually change. Like you actually kind of have control over like how you feel through diet, exercise, sleep, like all these different inputs. Like previously I was just kind of like eating whatever was put in front of me, and I felt however I felt. It wasn't like a thing that I ever thought about. And going through that like really opened my eyes. That kind of got me. And then I started reading about some of the other health hacks that were maybe a little better, like going paleo, cutting out processed foods, all this sort of stuff. And so I went paleo when I was in college for about a month, and just as an experiment, all my friends were like, wait, you don't eat like beer and pizza anymore? Like what the fuck is wrong with you? But honestly, after a month, I was like, okay, my sleep was better. My like acne cleared up. Like I got I'd like lost some body fat, felt like I looked better. And I was just feeling like way better, more energy, happier, all that stuff. And so kind of from there, I was like, wow, maybe there's something to this whole, like you are what you eat stuff. And that got me sort of started on the paleo path. And then, 3 years later, it was 3 years later, I'd moved to San Francisco. I worked in tech. I was working out at San Francisco CrossFit, which is like Kelly Starrett's gym. And a bunch of people there were talking about bone broth and came up, and I was like, that seems like a cool thing. Like I want to improve my gut health and whatnot. and went online to buy some. And to start a side business while I like figure out what's the big tech company I want to start. And pretty much from day one, we launched Kettle and Fire, and it just like took off on us. So here we are today, like 6 years later.
Justin, did you start making your own bone broth? Is that kind of how this whole thing started?
Yeah. So I wish that the answer was like super cool. Like I slaved over this in my kitchen and all that stuff. Truth was like, I'm a terrible cook. And so I bought it at the farmer's market, tried to buy it online, tried to buy it like in grocery stores. And I was like, man, this is super inconvenient. I'm traveling enough that, and bone broth is annoying enough to make that I'm just never going to drink this stuff. I have to make it every single time. And so we started working on it in like a commercial kitchen before I actually like made it on my own. So we got the pros involved, got like a chef and everything to start working on the like initial Kettle and Fire recipe.
When did you guys realize that you had a legitimate product that you guys were going to be able to scale into something like it is today?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think pretty much we knew that we had something pretty much from like day one. Like when we launched in late 2015, our first month, I think we did like 30,000 in sales. You know, we did like 200K, a little north in our first like 4 months in business. Our first full year in business, we did like just north of 2.5 million in sales. And so like it was pretty clear to me that we had something. I think the question with Kettle and Fire was always like, how big can it become? You know, like when you're kind of like the first mover in a new category, I think that's always the biggest question. It's not like, is this going to be a thing? Because you can clearly see like, wow, we have just started working on this and we have like 1 million in sales. This is definitely a thing. The question is way more like, will this be a $10 million business? You know, a 3 to 5, 10, 20, $50 million business. And I think that's like always the part that is really hard to tell. Yeah.
Was that 30K a month? Was the website still called bonebroths.com?
Yeah, it was. It was the worst name in the world, man. That was the other part is like we launched it. And when we first launched, this is another reason actually why I thought we had something is like when we first launched the business, we were selling it from bonebroths.com. A box of bone broth, which is the same size of bone broth that we sell today. You know, today you can buy it at Whole Foods from like $7 to $7.49, somewhere in there. At the time we were selling it for somewhere between $12 and $15 a box, which is just insane. And, you know, people were paying for shipping, the branding sucked. We were like, the product quality was kind of all over the place. Like there were so many ways in which you could just look at our business and you'd be like, these guys suck. Like this shouldn't be working. Like this is not like a well-optimized business run by like an amazing entrepreneur. This is like a pretty crappy business run by like, you know, 25-year-olds who like didn't know what they were doing. And it was still working. And so that to me was like a really good sign of like, wow, if this is working now, imagine once we like really dial in product, once we dial in price, once we dial in branding, once we like do all these things that I figured we could do.
And so once you had the product that sort of had proven itself out, how did you guys kind of iterate to get to something that you guys were like confident in? Like you guys started working on branding and like getting that price down, I'm sure. Like was a lot of it just like operational too?
Yeah, a lot of it's not sexy stuff. I mean, it's like we hired a branding agency and we did a rebrand that took us 7 months. You know, that's what got us Kettle and Fire. Actually came up with the name when we were in Austin at Paleo FX. We were like in a hot tub at a friend's place. We were just like batting around names and came up with Kettle and Fire. And so we did that. We did a ton of operational stuff. Like early on in the business, we were like not really sure if this would be a thing. And so you're not signing year-long like supply contracts with bone suppliers, which means that you're not getting the best pricing. You're a tiny customer for like your manufacturing partner, which means you're not getting the best pricing. Like you basically have like no negotiating leverage across the board, which meant that as soon as we got that, as soon as we could point to sales and our growth rate, we could be like, hey, this is a thing, get on board. Like we're kind of building something cool here. And that helped a lot with pricing. I mean, in some ways it's like almost a miracle that new consumer brands get off the ground ever, given like how badly the deck is stacked against you as a new consumer brand. Like you have no awareness, you're paying more for all your materials, you're paying more for branding, you're paying for distribution. It's like fuck man, stuff's just really expensive. And it takes a while to get costs down.
I was gonna ask, how the hell were people hearing about you guys? Like, I feel like you
Yeah.
have to be kind of like really tied into these types of products.
Yeah. I mean, we got, our timing was good. And so I think that if you were like in the ancestral health world or the paleo world, you knew what bone broth was, like we came on the scene at a time where there were like not that many options, and all of the options that existed were either frozen, which was like super expensive and annoying to ship, product quality kind of suffered for that reason, or the founders and the team didn't really like understand online marketing very well. And that was kind of my background, is I knew how to do growth and marketing, and we like hired what I still think is like one of the best growth teams in all of CPG. And so that helped a lot. And we also got a bunch of influencers on board. Like within a year of launching the brand, we were one of the first Whole30 approved partners. We were like, had Mark Sisson as an advisor investor, Ben Greenfield, Wellness Mama, Chris Kresser, like a bunch of these people, Mark Devine, that were like, really got behind us and were like, yes, this thing needs to exist. And we're willing to like promote us to their audience and talk about, you know, what bone broth is, why it's awesome, why they should buy Kettle and Fire, all that sort of stuff.
So it sounds like you were pretty strategic about picking the right advisors that were very involved in the ancestral paleo space at the time.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, it's a tactic that you see more and more often now, is like you can't really buy authenticity. And so in some ways, like if you're an influencer or someone with an audience, you're just like, I'm starting to see this now. I'm like a nobody, and people are like sending me random products in the mail being like, hey, will you talk about this in your newsletter or something? And like my former business partner, Anthony, he and I started Perfect Keto together. He gets this all the time. It's like, people just want to, it's really important to like get in front of people's audiences. And if you're someone that has an audience, all these companies and founders that have products that are aligned with your mission, like want to talk to you. And so we just had a bunch of those conversations and tried to figure out like, how do we get these people to talk about bone broth, and like who the company that's making the best bone broth was us. And so they were pretty happy to, for the most part.
One of the articles that we love that you wrote on your website it's literally called "How I Validated My Idea for Kettle and Fire," and it's just super transparent. It's so easy to read. It's really helpful for a lot of people. And one of the things that you talked about is that you basically just set up that landing page, bonebroths.com, and started slinging it. And you didn't even have a physical product, right? You just were marketing the idea. And the reason why I'm asking is that something that you would recommend for other people, or is that more so just like kind of your personality? You like to just jump headfirst into things and then just figure it out if there's a demand there?
Yeah, I would say that I'm like just not. I kind of like learn best by just like getting in the flow of things. And so for me, I didn't know anything about bone broth. I didn't know anything about CPG. I didn't know anything about anything. And so I wanted to be like, I want to test an idea and get super clear signal from the market that like, this is something people want. And, you know, it wasn't like I woke up and I was like, I need to start a bone broth company more than anything in the world. Like, I'm not like, you know, Jesus Christ of bone broth or anything where like, this is my only mission. It was like, I wanted to start a business, and there were a bunch of areas I was interested in, and bone broth was one of them. And so decided, rather than like, I came at it less from like a missionary standpoint and more from the standpoint of like, I want to figure out what business is going to work. And for me, the best way to figure out what business is likely to work is testing stuff. And so that's what I did. And candidly, it like, starting a business is really hard. And in the early days, like the lack of feedback that you get is one of the hardest things for me. And so even having like validation where it's like the tiniest bit of feedback, like, wow, I sold $48 of fake bone broth that I haven't made today, is like it was actually incredibly useful to like help me figure out, okay, we can sell this. How do I solve the next problem, which is like actually producing this? I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. Justin, fast forward to today where you're at, and what sort of things have you, like, if you had like one or two takeaways to distill to someone who's thinking about starting a business, like what sort of advice would you give to people who are, you know, were in your shoes back then?
Yeah. I've thought about this a lot, and I've written about it a good bit, but I think that, I think for me that one of the things that I did that was really useful was start a lot of businesses, and like finally one of them worked in like a big way, which was, Kettle and Fire was the first one. But going into Kettle and Fire, like I'm actually a very big fan of side hustles. And again, mostly this applies more to people who like want to start a business than it does to like a Patrick Collison or a Mark Zuckerberg. Like if you're one of those people, just like ignore everything I have to say. But if you're like a more average person like me that wants to start something, like I think that getting a business off the ground as a side hustle is that like covers your rent and some of your food and like really lowers your burn rate so that you can do experimentation indefinitely is like, it was such a huge hurdle for me. And I started making Udemy courses that were paying me like $2,500 a month, which meant that I could cover my rent, which was $1,500, and have some to spend on travel and food. And that meant that I had like practically infinite runway to experiment with different ideas. And so that's what I did. And, buying that runway allowed me to test a bunch of shit. Kettle and Fire was like the third or fourth different idea that I tested. And it was the one that like really resonated. And so I kind of ran with it.
Are there any trends just in the health and wellness space that you're particularly interested in moving forward?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, for sure. I think health and wellness is like a big space, and I think it's only going to become bigger. Like, I think that the average person is sick and statistically getting sicker. I think that the average person is like depressed and anxious and has mental health issues and chronic illness, and like all of those things are getting worse, not better. And so, yeah, I think there's like an infinite number of businesses in this space. Like some specific trends that I'm very bullish on are, I'm pretty bullish on like, some framework that I like to use is like, think of like a massive mega trend. Like you could think about VR phones, like, everyone like being connected all the time, and like pick a counter trend to that you can sort of assume will grow in lockstep with the bigger trend. And so for me, I'm pretty bullish on like anything around helping someone control their like phone or social media addiction. I think there's probably a big company to be built there, or an interesting one. I think that like non-pharmaceutical mental health interventions, things like psychedelics are going to be big. Things like breath work are big and going to be bigger. Meditation is like growing in popularity. I think that, I also think that like other things I'm interested, I actually think like stretching and body work is going to be like a much bigger category over the next decade. Like most people are in pain to some degree or another, and moving your body intentionally and stretching and doing like very intentional joint and movement work can help alleviate that. And then on the food side, I think that like gut health and gut function is going to be like it's a big category now, and it's just going to be much bigger, along with anti-vegetable oil sentiment that I'm seeing like everywhere.
Yeah. Justin, one of the things that I noticed about Kettle and Fire is you guys recently launched a regenerative brand of the bone broth that you guys have, which is amazing. Is that something that you're spending more time looking into as an area that you may try to dabble in the future?
Definitely. Yeah. I think regenerative agriculture is like, it's that's actually, speaking of trends, that's another big trend that I'm a big believer in. Like, I basically think that the environmental stuff, no matter like the extent to which you agree with it or not, it's like definitely a hot button issue and something that we're talking about all the time. And if I think about like what is likely to function better, a hyper monocropped industrialized agriculture system that turns out trash like Beyond Burgers and whatnot, or a move back to like a better way of land management and food production, which I think is regenerative agriculture, like my money's on number two every single time. And so I think that regen, I'm spending a lot more time there. I think that like we're still in such early innings on the regenerative ag standpoint. Like so many people talk about it. Consumers are aware of it. They're like talking about it. But most products, if you go to the grocery store, are like not regenerative. Regenerative doesn't even have like a USDA standard. And so you go to the farmer's market and it's quite possible that the farmer that's claiming regenerative is like nothing even close. And so we had to go through a bunch of sorting and talking to producers, suppliers, all this sort of stuff to even come close to getting towards what the sort of savory principles that kind of govern like the regenerative agriculture movement. But yeah, I'm hyper bullish on it. I think that it's like better for people, it's better for the planet, it's better for animals, it's better for the land. It's just like one of the few win-win-wins, I think, in like the food space generally.
It does feel like the consumer still needs like the education piece on it too, where like brands like Kettle and Fire will be some of the first ones that like people will start to associate like regenerative agriculture. Okay, like what is this? It's like when people start looking into other trends like I don't even know, like low fat or whatever other food trend there is, like it shows up on a box or on labeling, and then people start to actually figure out what it is.
Yep.
Most consumers, probably like less than 1% of people actually understand what regenerative agriculture is. So how do you think about educating your consumers as you try to grow that line?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, the reality is that like for very few companies, education is like almost always very expensive, and it's almost never worth it for like with very few exceptions. Like I can count on like maybe in one hand companies that were actually able to educate an audience. I think what tends to work much better is instead of trying to be like, hey, we're Kettle and Fire, you should buy regenerative for X, Y, and Z reason, you think of a brand as like an amplifier of other people's voices and education. Whereas like I want to lean on Force of Nature guys and like the work that they're doing over there, and talk and the Cook's Venture guys and like all these different companies that are doing regen stuff, and the individuals within those companies, and trying to amplify and like learn more about what they're doing and sort of like educate as a coalition rather than an individual brand. Because the truth is that like if we spent like a 500K or something on like a regenerative agriculture education campaign that even it reached 5 million people, and a couple, I don't know, 10% of those people, these would be insane. This would be the best campaign we've ever run. But 10% of those 5 million bought our regenerative agriculture product. We would maybe make in margin, like barely make that money back in like a best case scenario. And so it's just like, as a company, unfortunately, I just think that consumer education is hard, expensive, and it takes time. And in almost every case, you're better off just like doing small bits of work that you can to educate people, but hoping that people like Mark Hyman, Mark Sisson, a bunch of like, the Savory Institute, they do a lot of the bulk work around regenerative agriculture, and like you can help fund some like people to transition to regen, fund education initiatives they're running, that sort of stuff. But yeah, I think as a brand, it's often like hard and expensive to do education yourself.
Do you see a world? Do you think consumers will eventually wake up to just kind of the truth behind some of these fake commodities like Oatly and Beyond Meat? Because I'm sure you've probably spent a lot of time thinking about that.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's happening in some small ways already. I think that, I think it's happening in some small ways. I think that probably there's a long way to go. I think that the sad truth is that like you kind of have to look around and like conclude that most people don't actually care that much about what they put in their bodies, which like I empathize with. I was one of those people at one point. And I think that at the end of the day, I'm like less bullish on consumer education being the driving factor, and more interested, or it seems like a higher leverage point to me, to focus on other things. Like if you removed crop subsidies from like corn, soy, wheat, I think that like a lot of things in our food supply chain that make it messed up would kind of be fixed overnight. Like stuff like that. That's like not sexy, pretty boring to talk about maybe. But it's like what I think ends up moving the needle in the most case.
Justin, when you're thinking about sort of the whole ecosystem that you're playing in, like consumerism is really the fuel that can drive a lot of change, but it feels like your brand is very much like mission focused and has these like ethics and ethos around some very important like environmental topics, like personal health topics. How do you guys stay true to that? Like, is there something like, what do the meetings look like when you guys are talking about these types of decisions?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, this is one of the challenges with running a food company is, and being in the food space in general, is like at every point, basically every decision point where you're making a decision about what goes into the product, your incentive is like to cut like a slight corner, like Campbell's at some point in the 80s was like, well, what if instead of using like broth in our soups, we like just did more water. And now it's like, they don't use any broth and they use a bunch of additives to like give it umami flavor. And it's just like water and a bunch of additives and some like super conventional tomatoes and whatnot. And like, I think that a really important piece of what we do is like, we try and talk a lot about our values internally. We believe super strongly that like our consumers buying Kettle and Fire because they think that, because they understand that like we are a company that really values what we put in our products, which is why people buy it. And then we have guidelines internally around like, these are our values. This is what we will put in our products. This is what we won't. And we're willing to lead and take a risk on, being the first in a category to move into a category like regenerative. Like right now, we're the only regenerative bone broth out there, as far as I know. And we're the only one certainly on shelves at Whole Foods. And if you walk the shelves at Whole Foods, probably the most progressive retailer, at least with national distribution, like there are probably 30, 20 brands that are doing like a regenerative product. And we're one of them. And like, we're willing to sort of take that stance and lean into some of the things that we think are right from a food and values standpoint. But it's hard, and it helps a lot that like the founding team is still involved. The first people that we hired are still involved. And we spent a bunch of time like talking about and codifying values that say, here's what we will do. And here's like what we'll never do as a company, and compromising on ingredient quality is one of the things that like, we just won't do.
Yeah. It's interesting. You talked there about like cost optimization and like getting rid of ingredients and trying to basically solve for, how you can actually make a profitable product. We had one of our friends on. He used to work in big food for a massive like burrito, like frozen pizza company. And his job was basically to figure out across the business how to optimize costs and like make a frozen burrito so that it costs $2. So like what goes into that? It's basically just like, replacing certain oils with like less quality oils. So I think that speaks to exactly what you're talking about. It's like these companies are fixed on their values. And I think like that's an important point to highlight.
Well, I think it's values. I also think it's like companies to some extent reflect the choices of the consumer base that they're serving. And so if you look, like the US out of Western nations spends less of our, like on a household basis, we spend less of our income on food than like almost any other Western nation. And so in a sense, like Americans are saying like, we don't actually care to overspend on food and food quality, and the market is responding. And like, I think that it's not a coincidence that America spends less on food as a household basis and leads the world from like a chronic disease kind of standpoint. Like I think those two things go together. I do think though that there's like a growing and important cluster of consumers that realize this and understand this and are willing to like spend more on food and food experiences and quality and all this sort of stuff that leads to them being healthier, happier and whatnot, even if it comes at like quite a literal cost. Unfortunately, people are willing to make that trade-off. I make that trade-off every day.
Yeah, it almost reminds me of, because Harrison and I both like consciously make the decision to buy Kettle and Fire. I've had ulcerative colitis for 6 years, and drinking bone broth was huge for me to just clear up my autoimmune symptoms. And like, I'll even notice I'll go off my diet, and then for like the next 24 hours, my stomach is just a mess. And I'll literally drink like 2 to 3 cups of bone broth. And it's like this, the nourishing feeling that it has on your gut is insane. But it's like knowing that I'm intentionally choosing to buy Kettle and Fire. Yeah, maybe I'm paying like $2 more than the brand right below it, the conventional brand. It almost reminds me of like some of these telemedicine clinics that are popping up with like these holistic health practitioners where yes, they won't take insurance, but you're actually getting a doctor that's going to spend like an hour and a half, 2 hours with you. They're invested in your health and they're going to help you prevent these diseases as opposed to just like, reactively treating an illness. I almost kind of view those two things in the same light. So I don't know.
I totally agree. Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, it's funny. Yesterday, I was talking with a founder in the healthcare space, and he was kind of sharing, and we were talking about one of the biggest issues, I think, in like our healthcare system today is that there's no reimbursement right now for like anything preventative. like less than 3% of all healthcare spend is spent on preventative med, or anything in the prevention category, which includes food, exercise, all these sorts of things. It's like you have ulcerative colitis or had, like there is so much that could be done to not only to like prevent that, but also to treat it from a food standpoint that like no doctor, no healthcare provider, no payer, no one in the current system as it exists today is incentivized to tell you about, teach you about, treat you with, whatever. Like no one makes money when you treat an illness that you have using food or other sort of prevention. Everyone makes money when you treat it using like pharmaceutical or other sort of like doctor and sort of like healthcare driven intervention system. And like, I think that is the core thing that needs to change is like, I wrote a little bit about this in my last newsletter, but I just don't think that the system changes until either we get single payer healthcare, which like I'm pretty, bearish on and seems incredibly unlikely to happen. And I'm not even sure if it'd be a great thing, or like there's some way that like entities get rewarded basically for making someone healthier and not sicker. And until then, I think like we're in a tough spot.
Brett, put some numbers on like the cost of your, like what you were dealing with the Remicade treatments and stuff. Cause it's shocking. Like the amount of money that if you took like the lifetime value of the money that you're spending on that medication and just put it towards like better food, it doesn't even compare what's the better cost to be investing in.
It's insane. Yeah. Cause I was on a biologic called Remicade and you have to get it via infusion every 8 weeks. And it's $50,000 per infusion every 8 weeks. And I think there's 1.5 million people in the US that have colitis, but then plus everyone with Crohn's, IBS, psoriasis, eczema, like all these autoimmune conditions are treated with Remicade. So you look at the cost of that, and this is probably a good segue into like the CGM cohorts that you run, because you got Harrison onto levels, and then Harrison got me to start doing the CGM challenge. And it's like, things, right? You imagine for a health insurance company, if they would cover a CGM for non-diabetics, it would be like the best investment they could ever make.
Yeah, I think so too. But like, if you look at it, like, I don't know how deep you want to go into this system, and I only have a rudimentary understanding of healthcare, but like, as I understand it, because the payers, the insurers don't have any way to reimburse for prevention. None of the providers are basically lining up to say like, hey, here's a different product, to a different treatment other than Remicade for 10 grand a month. Like as a payer, you're sort of like, it's not that it doesn't matter, but you're like, if you're saying that you're not going to reimburse for preventative, then all you can do is just eat the cost as it comes in. And like, you're not paying sticker price across the board because you've negotiated rates with every hospital and the like. You're not paying for many of the people that get this stuff because they're on Medicaid, Medicare, any number of these things. And so like their businesses work well, even with how fucked up the system is. And so I think that like, yes, as a health insurer, in theory, you would think that they want to save this money. In practice, it seems like they may not care because like they're super profitable, massive businesses that are extremely valuable like today. And it might just be the case that if they focus on a bunch of prevention stuff across the board, maybe like the need for them to underwrite actual interventions goes down 80% because everyone's healthier. And like, though they've saved money looking at one patient on a system level, they've actually lost a bunch of market share because like they're underwriting a much healthier populace. I don't know.
Yeah, it makes me think about the incentives again. And I know you've been involved with levels. I'm definitely interested in hearing more about that, like how you got interested in that whole space. But another thing I remember we talked about was your interest in cryptocurrency and how there's a lot of like things about crypto, Bitcoin specifically, that might help realign some incentives across like just like the monetary system in general. Like money is just flowing to the wrong places. And I'm curious if you think that like some of these crypto projects may help, change some of that.
Yeah, I think so, potentially on a long time horizon. But like my basic thing is I think that like in many ways in the US at least, like we're suffering from captured institutions that like have institutional incentives that are different and not in the interest of like the vast majority of people. Like, I think that never before have we had an education system that pays so much for so little results. Same is true in healthcare. We spend more than ever for a sicker population than ever. I think that like writ large, our like government doesn't really work. And if you look at Russia, if in many ways, and if you look at what's going on in Russia, things happening at home, like sort of the hit the print button or like economic policy has been like the main way that our federal government has responded to a lot of issues that we face on like a national basis. And so to the extent that I think like the federal government doesn't work very well and causes a lot of problems, like I kind of think that massively removing power from the federal government as much as we can and like is probably a good thing. And I think that one way that can be done is by transitioning to non-sovereign forms of money like Bitcoin, where hopefully they have actual competition for for their monetary services, which wasn't a thing like 20 years ago. So I think crypto is still like super early, insanely risky, but like I'm definitely hopeful that it's like one in a bunch of tools that like our generation needs to build like a better functioning society. Because I don't think the one we have is like working super well right now.
Yeah, I think it's one of those areas that the more you think about it, the more you realize how long it's actually going to take for a lot of these things to change. But it does seem like if you want like decentralized systems to work, and like they tend to work better for everyone when you have a little bit more skin in the game. It does seem like there's some hope there.
Yeah. I mean, I don't even care about like the decentralization aspect. I think is somewhat important, but to me, it's actually like more the competition aspect that I think is important. Like a government basically has no competition.
Yeah.
They're the only guy with a gun in the room, and so they can do whatever they want. And I think that to the extent that you have Bitcoin or alternative forms of currency that are acting as true competition to like the sovereign sort of to sovereign money and the power that money grants, like hopefully that just forces the government or people in the government to be slightly better actors. That's like all that I'm hoping for.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've noticed that there's this big convergence between Bitcoin maximalists and people that are interested in the carnivore diet, animal-based diet. Have you done anything on that? Are you interested in that at all? Like just the convergence of those two groups?
Definitely. I mean, like for the first time, I think possibly in history, like crypto is basically it's like an idea that you could get paid for believing, which is sort of a first in human history. Like in 2009 or 2012 even, you didn't have to go to Yale. You didn't have to like be smart. You didn't have to be well connected. You could just like buy Bitcoin, and just adopting that belief sort of means that you're like rich now. And I think that basically wasn't possible before ever in history. And like, I guess that you could buy a public company on the stock market, but you still needed to have like a fair bit of money to do so, unless you like bought Amazon and held it for 20 years. But even then, like Bitcoin's the best performing asset ever. And the people that believed in Bitcoin early on and crypto early on are like pretty libertarian, fringy weirdos who bought into like a digital currency in 2011, 2010. I'm not knocking that. Like, I'm probably one of these weirdos in a lot of ways, but I think that basically like you have this fringe group of people who got paid for their fringe beliefs, and that's a first in human history to some degrees. And because of that, you're going to have a community that's full of fringy, like open to believing weird fringe beliefs that has gotten rewarded for that. And so like, I think that you're probably going to see like a lot of weird stuff coming out of the crypto community over the next couple of decades, because they basically got paid for being weird 8 years ago and are now just doubling down on getting weirder and weirder. That's my read, at least, on like the carnivore Bitcoin thing. And then secondly, the other thing I think that's relevant that I'll just say quickly is like there's I think that also like Bitcoin is sort of like a middle finger to the system of like, system is broken, I don't believe in it, let's like make our own or make a better system, or like math over government is sort of the rallying cry. And I think that once you realize like, wow, X institution is broken, maybe we should build a better one, you start looking at all the institutions in your life and you go like, whoa, maybe like not only is the Fed broken, but the USDA, holy shit, the FDA too, you know, and you're just like, whoa, all these institutions are kind of like rotten and like wrong about a bunch of shit. And you just start questioning all these things. And as you dig further and further, you look around and you go, great, like we have a country that the FDA has this food pyramid that tells us what to eat, and that its output, the sickest, like least healthy, most expensive healthcare system in the world. Like maybe we should start to question the assumptions and not just believe that like this institution actually knows what it's doing from a health standpoint.
Yeah. Yeah. I look at Bitcoiners in a really, like, I really admire a lot of them, because from meeting a lot of them, you realize that they're very, like, they have multiple disciplines where I would consider a lot of them like almost experts in. And they basically have taken this asset that, like, it's an extreme ownership asset. Like if you really understand Bitcoin, you can create, like, and believe in it. Like no one can really take it from you. And so I feel like that ethos can transcend across your life, where it's like, okay, what else can I take extreme ownership of? Like my health, my personal finances, my family. So it kind of all feeds into each other. And the more I like get involved with the community, the more I realize like a lot of these people are so similar. And it's creating a really like, I mean, from an outsider's perspective, if you're not a Bitcoiner, you probably think it's a cult. But I think that if you're talking to these people, you realize that there's a lot of like very, very highly ethical people who are a part of it and who really do take extreme ownership across the board. Like they are healthy people. They understand how the world works. Like some very high level conversations I've had with people about like global econ and like regenerative farming, like literally across the board. Like they understand these topics better than most. And so like it's definitely a space that I admire a lot of the people that I come into contact with. I'm not sure if you've had similar experiences, but
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it's a very interesting subculture and an interesting group of people for sure. Yeah, I think that like, I think that like anytime you build your identity around believing something that's non-consensus, like even if I think you're wrong, you tend to be like pretty interesting. So yeah, I find it like a very cool subculture that I know quite a few people in. Although I also don't think that Bitcoin fixes everything, which is maybe a point of contention.
Justin, something we talk a lot about just in our Twitter spaces is just adopting like a more hyper localized approach to eating, like connecting with your local rancher, farmer, going to your farmer's market if you don't know where to start. Is that something that you're pretty passionate about as well, or have adopted over the last couple of years?
Yeah, I think it's important. I mean, I think that like, I basically think that one of the meta things that is good for people is to get like really rooted in some sort of local environment and local community. Like I think in so many ways people like engage with the world around them and in through abstractions. It's like your food system is like abstracted through a grocery store. Your relationships are abstracted through your phone. Community is like, so, you know, a Slack or a Discord channel. It's like not people around you. And I think that like breaking through those abstractions and like really rooting into like real in-person community environment, food system, all that sort of stuff is really important. And like, that's probably much more how humans were meant to live. I also think that like, yeah, I think that like getting an understanding of your local food system and the people behind it is super important. And it's also like deeply pleasurable and like cool. It's like cool to know who's the person who's like philosophies and mind and the way they think about the world informs, you know, how they raise a chicken or pork or like how they kill a bison or whatever. Like there's a lot of like beauty and nuance in the food system and the people behind it that I think you miss out on when like a steak is a steak is a steak at the grocery store and they're all served on white styrofoam plates wrapped in the same plastic. It's like, that's not really my goal of like what, that's not really like the world I want to live in. As just being a sort of passive consumer of an abstracted commodity.
I think one thing all three of us might share is we've all been out to Rome Ranch to see the bison harvest. Is that true?
Yeah. We did one. We did a Kettle and Fire team retreat at Rome Ranch, and we did a bison harvest with the whole team, and it was
so cool.
Powerful experience, man. Very powerful.
What were some of the takeaways as like a company like bringing everyone there? Because I know like when you go out there and you hear the whole story behind like what they're trying to do out at Rome Ranch, it's hard not to have some takeaways that kind of alter your behavior afterwards. I feel like it definitely changed
Totally.
a lot of the ways I think about things.
Yeah, I think that it was a really powerful experience for the team. I mean, a lot of people on the team, like I was saying, for the majority of people in the country, and our team's not an exception. Like, if your food is a thing that appears in the grocery store and you like don't really give that much thought about like where it came from, the land it was raised on, the environmental impact, the health impact, all this sort of stuff. And so getting to go full circle and like as a team, see the animals, learn about the habitat, learn about how like that bison herd is regenerating the land at Rome Ranch, to learn about regenerative agriculture, then to like harvest a bison, break it down. It's like, we had everyone like dip their fingers in the blood and taste some. Like it was kind of like I realize I sound like maybe a cult leader or something here, but it was like a powerful experience. Like people were crying and like connecting with their food and their food system in a religious way that you just like don't get at the supermarket. And I think everyone was very fired up about like, wow, this is like why we're working on building a better food system. And this is why like I'm happy to be a part of like what Kettle and Fire is doing and pushing for this bigger, better, different food system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a different feeling when you go to your fridge and you have a Ziploc bag filled with the meat of the bison that you watch die. Like, I just remember thinking to myself, I can't believe I'm about to eat this and this animal was alive like 24 hours ago. Like, I just
Totally
never had that feeling before,
Totally, man. Yeah, we got the liver, cut it up in little pieces, and like 2 hours later, it was like we're eating it. It was crazy. Yeah, and that's not an experience a lot of people have.
Mm-hmm. It's also cool how like intimately involved Taylor and Katie are in those experiences too, like after selling Epic and everything. And then you go to these retreats, it's like 15, 20 people max, and they're both like front and center. I think Katie was like crying, I think she gets very emotional every single time. Like, you can see how much this means to them as a family. It's just really cool.
Mm-hmm. Totally, man. They're awesome. I mean, I have all the respect in the world for them and what they're doing in the regenerative movement.
Justin, what sort of health things are you doing on a personal level now to sort of optimize? I know you've got a lot of hooks on the water, you're a busy guy. How do you sort of manage your personal health these days?
Yeah, so I think a couple things. I would say I've been working on my sleep lately, so I've been like trying to get my light hygiene better. So like not trying to like wear blue blockers around the house past certain hours, trying to like just be better about that stuff generally.
Mm-hmm.
I also turning down lights, getting dimmers, all this sort of stuff, not working super late. I'd say my diet is like pretty good now. And the one change I've been making is like trying to add more organ meats into my diet as like a consistent thing, and bone broth. Obviously it's been a staple of my diet for several years now, which has been good. But honestly, I would say lately I've been much more interested in the like emotional and social aspects of health, and not just like what do I put in my body and how do I make like my like meat sack operate better, but more just like, I'm like a body and a mind and a spirit and all these sorts of things. Like, how do I connect with people better? How do I like be more vulnerable, build a better partnership with my fiance? Like stuff like that has been where I've been focusing a lot lately, I would say. And it's been great. Like, it's been helpful from a stress and personal happiness standpoint in a way that I think is like useful far beyond just like optimizing for life hacks,
Yeah. I found breath work to be one of those things that like, you feel really uncomfortable doing it at first because you're like, you don't feel the results, you don't see the results right away, and you're like, your conscious mind is like, what are you doing? Like, you're just like sitting here breathing. But after you do it a few times, you're like, okay, I'm starting to get control of my thoughts. I'm starting to pay attention to what I'm thinking about, what's on my subconscious. I think it's one of those things that you need to spend a little bit more time doing, like, or people in general need to spend a little bit more time just like trying it, because there is so much benefit to it.
Yeah, totally agree. Do you use Othership?
Say it again.
Do you use the Othership for breath work, or what do you do?
No, I use what's it called? Headspace. Yeah. I've been using Headspace. I don't know. Is that one a good one?
Dude, I think it's the best.
Okay,
I like here,
Mothership.
I'll send a link right now, but
cool.
these guys, I am friends with the founders, but like they are like the most insanely like experientially minded people that I've met, and they're obsessed with breathwork. It's so cool, and like you can tell that their shit is just like I think they're so good that like they're gonna come through Austin and do like a sound breathwork kind of experience at some point in the next couple months,
Okay.
and I'll definitely let you know.
Yeah.
They're awesome. They're so cool.
My only prerequisite is that it has to be like an Australian accent doing the breath work.
They're Canadian, so they fail that one.
The guy on Headspace has like the most like iconic.
Andy?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's great.
So Brett and I did this breathwork class out in San Diego, and it was like next level. It was next level.
Cool.
Yeah, literally some of the best thoughts that I've ever had. It was this incredible studio. They have like sauna, cold plunge, but then a big part of their studio is actually putting you through these guided breathwork sessions, but they're like 45 minutes. So I had never done guided breathing for that long before. And just like getting,
Trippy, right?
actually, yeah, just using the body to get yourself into that like prime mental state was insane. And I remember both of us, I think we were both saying, Harry, we were like, if they had a studio like this in Austin, it would absolutely crush.
Would kill.
To your point, if you can capture that same feeling on an app and I don't need to go to a class every single time, that would be huge.
Yeah. What's the name of the breathwork spot in San Diego? I want to check that out.
It's called Breathe Degree. Yeah,
it's definitely worth going to. In the room that you walk into, it looks like a kindergartner's like nap room. Like they literally have like blankets laid out, pillows. You're like, what am I getting myself into? Like I'm literally sitting like shoulder to shoulder with Brett, and then you get into it and you realize that like it's a great experience. So
that's so cool.
Yeah, and it was almost like I literally had tears in my eyes, not because I was like overcoming past trauma. It was like literally like the visions that you get and just being so positive. It's insane. And it's like, you just have to experience it. You have to do it for yourself.
I think one of Justin's points earlier, it's like about kind of being present in the moment too, where you're not just like plugged into your phone you're removed you're removed from the digital world for 60 minutes and actually just doing something that you have to be present for. So I think all that stuff is so important.
Yeah. Justin, speaking of just kind of like improving your personal happiness, I feel like I've listened to a few interviews with you talking about you being pretty bullish on the psychedelic space overall. That's something you're very interested in, correct?
Definitely. Yeah. I've invested in the space. I'm like very bullish in the space, donated to MAPS. Yeah, definitely very bullish on psychedelics in general. Like if you look at like, we have a true like mental health crisis. We have like 30 plus million people on SSRIs, tons of people with anxiety, treatment resistant depression, all this sort of stuff. And like practically psychedelics and talk therapy basically doesn't really work for a huge chunk of people. SSRIs are like hit and miss from, have real side effects. Like I basically think that over the next 5 years, we're going to see clinical data that points to psychedelics being like psychedelics plus targeted therapy being the most efficacious way to like treat depression, anxiety, PTSD, addiction, like all sorts of things. And I'm hopeful that rather than like spending, tens of thousands of dollars a year on SSRIs as an individual or whatever it is, like we'll be able to have this new class of psychedelics that helps people with like mental, physical, emotional health across the board, and that like unlocks a lot of human potential, happiness, a bunch of other good stuff.
Justin, if people are interested in learning more about it, because it's definitely one of those topics I think is like hit or miss with a lot of people, where would you send them to? Yeah,
I think fortunately Michael Pollan wrote a book about this this space, so it's legit. Michael Pollan's talking about it, and so he wrote a book called How to Change Your Mind that I've like given to my grandmother, given to my aunt, given to my parents. Like it's really good, and I think that it's basically like talks about how almost every culture throughout history has had psychedelics or some sort of like psychedelic like experiences as a key cornerstone of like personal emotional, mental, and social development. Ours doesn't. And a big reason that we don't is basically because like Nixon was not a great president and had like a kind of racist agenda in the 70s around, drugs and psychedelics got lumped into a bunch of his like policy around anti-drug stuff. And so that seems like to me a silly reason to never try psychedelics. And so, I think that they're going to make a big comeback over the next decade.
Justin, one of the things that I know you're also interested in is the non-alcoholic or like alternatives to just like drinking culture in the US, which is obviously like grown in popularity. It's been somewhat one of these things that we like embrace and think that, we create culture around it. And
Yep.
I know that you are kind of creating some companies that are in the non-alcoholic space. How did you get involved with that? And what are your views on sort of that whole culture and how it's growing?
Yeah, great question. So I co-founded a brand called Surely, Surely. It's in the non-alcoholic space. We're the first like non-alc wine made with real wine. And the reason that I'm like into it is because I think that as you get older and even not, honestly, like just as people get sicker and more inflamed and whatnot, like people are starting to wake up to the negative impact that drinking has on their health. I think especially as more people are starting to use Whoops, Aura rings, Apple Watch, all this sort of stuff. Like if you track your sleep at all, by far the most obvious correlation you see is like, I sleep badly when I drink alcohol. And like everyone sees that. It's just so obvious. And so I think that as more and more people are like following and quantifying their health, there's going to be this whole movement behind that data of like, maybe I should not drink today. Maybe I should do something else so that I still sleep well. I still feel energetic the next 3 days. I do X, Y, and Z. And so I think that is, I think that's a huge trend. I think that generally, like, if I think about my friends who are super into health and wellness, consistently, the top thing that those friends do that they know is unhealthy is drink alcohol. And so like, there's so many people that build their identities around health and wellness, yet still make these health trade-offs when it comes to drinking. And so I think that there's room for a whole class of products that removes the stigma from not drinking, that provides people an outlet. It's still something different than water. You still feel like you're part of the moment, but that also doesn't like come with a huge cost from a health, sleep, and other standpoint. And so that's why I'm like really, really bullish on the non-alcoholic space in general, and specifically very, very bullish on whatever company, hopefully it's Surely, but maybe not, can figure out like a non-alcoholic buzz or like sort of social drink of the future. Like I think that there's something there. I'm not sure what it is. Maybe it's kava, maybe it's like something different, but I feel like there's something at that intersection that could be interesting.
It's funny because I've recently been like pretty strong on not drinking, and there is such a stigma when you choose not to drink. But if there is like something about it that gives you some sort of like, hey, it gives me like a little high or something. Like totally. I saw this drink on a menu at a restaurant recently, and they branded it so well. It was like euphoric. They called it euphorics, and it didn't really have anything in it that would make you feel euphoric, but they just called it euphoric. Yeah, totally. And maybe it had some like green thing in it that made people feel something. Yeah. But I think that's almost part of the puzzle too. It's like you need to feel like you are getting in this like delusioned state of like drunkenness. Totally. So
I just think like, what if you could bottle that feeling that you get after you come out of like a cold plunge or something? Like if you could bottle that and make it so that I could like experience even half of that while I'm at a party, it's like, sign me up. That's fucking awesome.
100%. You also, I feel like too, once you start to hit like your late 20s, early 30s, and you're surrounding yourself with friends that are in the health and wellness space, you're like, maybe I'll just do like one glass of wine tonight. Like if Miles is going to cook like an open fire thing, and you'll have like 1 or 2 glasses of wine, or you're like, maybe I just don't even really need to drink at all. But like having that glass with you, because people, I don't know why, for when people are drinking and they see you not drinking, they get very triggered by that. So I feel like Shirley definitely solves for that. So
yeah, I mean, so I hosted a dinner party actually at Miles was that a couple weeks ago, and one of the things that I noticed is I was serving like normal wine and Shirley, and basically people were like, by having like a non-alc and an alc there, people can kind of like keep drinking, and you keep feeling like the dinner is still going, like not everyone's done with their drinks, you're still part of like the same moment, same conversation, but you can kind of like self-moderate in a way that's a little bit easier than like sitting there with an empty glass or just a glass of water for 3 hours, you know, around 6 strangers that you don't know. It's like, that's kind of, for whatever reason, that's socially hard.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I feel like we've covered a ton of ground, Justin, and you know, really appreciate you coming on and sharing some of your experience. I know our audience will definitely get a ton out of this. One of the things I wanted to point out was your newsletter, because I've personally got a ton out of it. How can people find you, and how can people find your newsletter?
Yeah, so if you go to justinmares.com, I have a link to my newsletter there, or just Google Justin Mares Substack. Should be able to find it pretty easily. I hope, at least.
Beautiful.
The newest one was out this morning, right?
Yeah, went out this morning. So,
yeah. We also love it. I love it. We also
appreciate that.
We think we found your new Twitter alias, and we think you need to start calling yourself the Jesus Christ of bone broth on Twitter.
that would be amazing.
Just in a non-account, that would be incredible.
Well, you've already outed me, dude. Now I can't use that.
We'll find something else. But,
JCBB maybe.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, dude, this was so great, man. Thanks so much for coming on, and just looking forward to actually getting to meet you in person too.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks so much for having me on. Let me know when you're in Austin. And you know, congrats again on like all the success you guys have had so far. It's pretty cool to watch.
Appreciate it, Justin.